Do you hear that? Cicadas. Not only are these large bugs fascinating to draw and to paint, but they are also surprisingly charismatic. I witnessed a cicada emerging from its final molting, still a bit wet and green. I might be in the minority, but I think these guys are kind of cute with those wide eyes and plump bodies. Now, they do leave their old clothes everywhere, but I will forgive them that. I had been tossing around a few ideas of things to draw this week, and nothing was urgently pressing upon me to do one thing or another, so this cicada became my sign to get on board with Cicadarama. I did a few pieces this week. One, I was imagining a cicada as a towering giant. One, exploring Cicada Brood X versus Cicada Brood Z. And lastly, the poetic elements of a cicada that make it a perfect stand-in for John Cusack in the movie Say Anything. Artistically, I also had a couple of objectives, and I'll talk about those and about the successes and the not as successes, not as successful successes. In this first piece, I wanted to continue the work I was doing with my Howl's Moving Castle painting from a week or two ago. And there I was trying to use perspective and extreme angles to emphasize scale, as well as challenging myself with multiple lighting sources in a scene that I'm building from my imagination. Now, anytime I'm drawing from my imagination, at least something that I don't know very well, I need to do some research. And in this case, I needed to know a little bit more about the anatomy of a cicada, even though I knew I wasn't going to do a true-to-life sort of thing. But I wanted it to be somewhat believable, you know. I actually love doing research, and I learned so much, and I'll share some of that with you as we go along in our Cicadarama journey today. So on this piece, I wanted to make this cicada look huge. I used a couple techniques. One is the obvious size contrast with the little butterflies there on the bottom left. If those are normal sized butterflies, that cicada is still going to be pretty large. It can be harder to indicate scale without something to compare your object to. But I used two other techniques. Overlap is one. I drew it so that the tail end of this cicada is obscured by the terrain in the back. It's just a tiny little thing, but in this case, it can drive home that this thing is quite large. I tried to do this sort of thing with my Howl's Moving Castle, but I didn't go far enough with that one, and things just didn't work out compositionally. But the last thing that I did was to use perspective to make this look very large. I'm putting the viewer's eye level below the body of this bug. So not only is that a more interesting viewpoint, it also indicates that it is probably bigger than us. It is a huge cicada. And I didn't use formal perspective lines to, have this sort of perspective. It's not really that technical. What I was doing is giving you some hints. One, we see the belly of the beast, so to speak, so we know that we're underneath it. We see that the knees there towering above the body. I just find it fun to imagine these sorts of things. They don't exist in real life, but it's fun to come up with that image. And, it would be very difficult or maybe impossible to get a photograph from this angle. So training our brains to imagine objects from these different perspectives can be a real asset, and it can be a lot of fun. Now, I wanted to make this piece pretty dynamic, real energetic. So one thing that I'm also doing is using highly saturated complementary opposites. We have, for instance, the blue of the body, and that really highlights the orange of the legs. The yellow sky highlights the kind of the purple background there, and it'll get more saturated as I go on and paint a little bit more. And maybe you'll notice that there's a bit of a spiral hinted at here with the butterflies, the leg, and the eyes, sort of a nautilus shape. That is one way of getting a viewer to look around the image a bit and not seeing it all at once. It creates some movement while still being harmonious. And honestly, I don't always or even usually put in this amount of thought into a composition, but sometimes something will seem off until I sit back and see, oh yeah, well this doesn't seem very balanced, or it needs something to feel finished. So if you keep those sorts of things in mind, it can become more automatic, and you can often have a more pleasing visual composition. Cicada fact number 1, you probably already know this, adult cicadas do not have mouths like this. They actually have a bit of a tube that is mostly hidden. It doesn't chomp down on leaves like some insects, but it'll pierce into something like a leaf, and it'll suck out liquids. Anyway, sometimes I finish a piece and I really like it, and that was one of them for me. I like the bold colors, the interesting viewpoint. And as always, the story behind this giant noise-making thing is something that just makes me think and ponder and dream up something. I heard earlier in the year that there was supposed to be this really rare coincidental emergence of 2 periodic cicadas, a 13-year and a 17-year brood. And I was kind of looking forward to that and how loud it would be. And I kept waiting and waiting. And then I read again that those 2 broods don't even exist where I live. So I was kind of bummed out. We do get annual cicadas here and a few periodic ones, like 2 to 5 year broods, but not the headline grabbing broods like they saw in parts of the Midwestern United States this year. But I do recall hearing about a Brood X, which I thought was a really cool name, and I thought it was one of the broods that was coming out this year, but it wasn't. It came out in 2021. Now, I'm telling you this because this will explain how my mind came up with this drawing. See, I imagined Brood X being like Gen X, and that there must be a millennial brood, and a baby boomer brood, and, of course, a Brood Z. So I decided to do a Brood X versus Brood Z thing, and I'm told by a younger person that there's a trend going on now, Gen X versus Gen Z, due to an Eminem album coming out or something. This wasn't what was intended, and not trying to piggyback on that at all. If it does piggyback on it, fine, I don't mind, but that wasn't the purpose. So, by the way, when I say versus, I don't intend any sort of animosity or that it's a fight or anything like that. It's not my style. But it's just interesting to compare, I think. I had a hard time figuring out, how does Gen Z dress? What is the fashion? And, from my research, I can see why I don't know. It seems to be a hodgepodge of things, pretty eclectic. And that personally, I'm totally behind that. I think that's great. There might be a mix of some fitted pieces and some pieces that are maybe 12 sizes too large from a thrift store. Lots of texture and colors. And fashion is one of those things that is so variable, and it's hard to define sometimes. I decided to draw my Brood Z little buddy here with a bit of everything. A blue knit cap, orange scarf, white dress, black pea coat, Doc Martens with slouch socks, and a purple bag because, why not? And of course, Starbucks. Even cicadas appreciate a taste of a Ventumoso caramel hazelnut whippuccino or whatever's in there. And then Mr. Brood X, the classic naturally distressed jeans t-shirt with ironic cicada skull graphic and Converse. I was going to give him a can of Coke, but I wanted the Starbucks cup to be more incidental than a meaningful statement, and I thought that contrast might be a little bit misleading. I didn't quite know how to capture the feeling of these generations, though, the outlook on life sort of thing. So I'll leave that up to you because I really don't know enough about Gen Z to really say with any sort of authority. But the overall feel of the scene, I think, is a mix of pessimism and hope, I think. I think it's interesting that when multiple broods of cicadas in real life emerge, their song or their call or whatever you want to call it is individual enough that everyone knows who is who. Sort of like how different generations of humans talk or the music they like. It does tend to identify us, and I find that interesting. I think this piece came together pretty well, and I really like the texture of the pavers on the street there. That was almost unintentional, but hey, I'll take it. I'm not sure that this picture can stand alone without some explanation, but one of the questions I often ask is, does this make me want to know the story? And I think, yeah, it does. So I'll count it a success. So here are a few things I didn't know about cicadas. First of all, they're big in Japan. I mean, both literally and figuratively. I don't watch a lot of anime, but some, and I noticed a couple times cicadas and their noises in the background. But apparently, this is a thing. Like, lots of anime uses the cicada to indicate the summer season and a feeling of home. It's such a thing that the Japanese say that summer hasn't started until the cicadas come out. And poetically, the cicada is often used to symbolize the impermanence of life, rebirth, and change. Some of these creatures spend 17 years underground only to come out in the open for a few weeks, and then they make themselves known, and in a big way. They have vibrating parts in their abdomen that's attached to like a moving diaphragm, and their whole tail section is hollow. So it can get loud. I know some places they don't have cicadas, but let me tell you, it can be next to deafening sometimes. It is an unusual experience, and some people hate it, some people love it. I'm probably more on the love side of that argument myself, but to each his own. Well, I went down a rabbit hole earlier, and maybe it's a cicada hole. This week I was listening to a song called Barracuda by the band Heart, and I was trying to think of what Led Zeppelin song it reminded me of. And my mind went to how Nancy Wilson of Heart was once married to Cameron Crowe, who wrote one of the better teen romantic movies of the 80s called Say Anything. And the leading role was played by John Cusack. He was playing a Gen X hero of sorts named Lloyd Dobler. And I thought, cicadas and Lloyd Dobler have some things in common. Are you okay? In one of the movie's most iconic scenes, Lloyd holds a boombox above his head playing Peter Gabriel's In Your Eyes to let Diane Court know that he will not give up on her in a very grand romantic gesture. Cicadas, too, they emerge en masse to a deafening chorus to their potential mates. Maybe not to In Your Eyes, but In Your Red Eyes, maybe? I don't know. And Diane's father is not happy about this. Lloyd is a very average guy, wanting to date his golden child, and he basically forbids that relationship. Lloyd knows, though, that he's not going to just go away. He is persistent. And cicadas, too, spending years underground, and though life is uncertain, they have a purpose to get the girl. Thirdly, Lloyd and Diane's relationship on film is just one summer long. Don't get me started on sequels. But even though this is brief, there are a lot of intense feelings. With cicadas, it's a brief window that they make themselves known, but they make the very most of that time. And lastly, Lloyd is just an average good guy underdog. He's endearing because he's real, he cares, and he has a certain charisma that, one tagline for the movie is, "To know Lloyd Dobler is to love him." Diane Court is about to know Lloyd Dobler. So, cicadas. They're often seen as mere bugs and pests, but they also manage to capture our attention in their own way. They also capture our hearts. Is to know a cicada to love them? I don't know. You let me know. I had half a thought of making a sticker out of this drawing. I don't know if there's any interest in stickers, especially those throwing back to the 80s, but that's why I left this one kind of simple. What does it all mean? I think that we all need to look into our inner cicada to really know the answer to that one. Well, you made it to the end of the video. Thank you so much. Hey, if it's not too much to ask, maybe give this video a like, leave a comment. I read all of them and I try to respond too. And of course, subscribe if you enjoy this sort of content. Something new every week, whether it makes a lot of sense or it doesn't. We'll see you then. Have a great week. Bye-bye.